video was created using artificial intelligence to recreate and remember what Christmas was like in the 1990s, capturing the atmosphere, habits, and feelings of that time.
In this video, we will revisit traditions, everyday habits, objects, and moments that defined Christmas in the 1990s.
Christmas in the 1990s did not announce itself loudly. It did not arrive through constant reminders, notifications, or endless advertising cycles designed to keep your attention. Instead, it appeared slowly, almost quietly, settling into daily life in a way that felt natural rather than forced. You didn't suddenly realize it was Christmas season. You gradually felt it becoming Christmas season. Days shortened, conversations changed, and time itself seemed to slow down just enough for anticipation to take root. Back then, Christmas was not something you consumed instantly. It was something you waited for, something that unfolded over weeks, sometimes even months, allowing excitement to build without being rushed. That slow build-up gave the holiday emotional depth. It wasn't about efficiency or optimization, it was about experience. One of the first things that disappeared from Christmas was the idea that waiting had value. In the 1990s, waiting was not an inconvenience, it was part of the magic. There were no countdown apps reminding you every morning how many days were left. The countdown lived in your mind, shaped by school days passing, weekends approaching, and casual conversations that slowly shifted toward Christmas without anyone officially declaring it. Christmas commercials felt special because you couldn't summon them whenever you wanted. They appeared at specific moments, usually in the evening, often when the family was together. When one came on, it felt like a sign, a reminder that Christmas was getting closer. Those commercials were not background noise, they were part of the ritual. Toy catalogs were not links or recommendations generated by algorithms. They were physical objects, thick pages filled with color, possibility, and imagination. You didn't scroll past them in seconds, you sat with them. You turned pages slowly, you folded corners, you circled things with a pen. You imagined entire futures built around a single picture on a page. The catalog itself became part of the experience, not just a means to an end. Writing letters to Santa was sincere. It was not ironic or symbolic. You chose your words carefully, knowing that asking for something did not guarantee receiving it. Once the letter was written and sent, there were no updates, no confirmations, no tracking numbers. There was only waiting. And in that waiting, imagination filled the space between desire and reality. Homes also changed in a different way during Christmas in the 1990s. Christmas did not simply decorate houses, it transformed them. Boxes were pulled out of closets and basements that had not been opened all year. Inside were decorations that did not match, colors that clashed, and ornaments that already carried years of history. Each piece had a story, even if no one could remember exactly where it came from. Decorating the house was not efficient, it was communal. Lights were tested one by one. Someone always complained, someone always laughed. There was frustration, patience, and eventually satisfaction. When everything was finally in place, it felt earned, not because it looked perfect, but because everyone had been part of it. Christmas had a specific smell back then, and it did not come from candles designed to replicate a season. It came from pine needles, old decorations taken out of storage, food being prepared slowly, and a house that felt alive. Those smells were real because the moments were real. Family traditions in the 1990s were rarely explained. They were learned by participation. You knew when decorating started, you knew who cooked what, you knew where everyone sat, even if no one ever assigned seats. These traditions were not written down or planned. They existed because they had always existed. They were repeated year after year, creating a sense of continuity that made Christmas feel stable, familiar, and grounding. Over time, many of these traditions faded, not because they were bad or outdated, but because life became faster, busier, and more fragmented. What disappeared was not the tradition itself, but the time required to sustain it. Christmas television in the 1990s was an event. Special programs aired at specific times, and if you missed them, you missed them. There was no streaming, no on-demand replacement. Families gathered around the television because that was where the moment was happening. Christmas movies, cartoons, and specials were shared experiences, watched together, remembered together. Some families recorded programs on VHS tapes, carefully labeling them, knowing they might never air again in the same way. That limitation created value, and value created memory. Today, Christmas content is endless, and because it is endless, it often fades into the background. Photographs during Christmas were also different. You didn't take dozens of pictures, you took a few. And because you took only a few, each one mattered. You didn't see them immediately. You waited days or weeks to find out how they turned out. There were no filters, no retakes, no perfection. The photos captured moments as they were, not as they were meant to appear. Christmas gifts carried a different kind of weight as well. They were not about quantity, they were about meaning. You didn't receive many gifts, but each one felt significant. Wrapping mattered, presentation mattered, and surprises were genuine because you could not research everything in advance. Often, gifts were shared. A single game console, a board game, something that brought people together instead of pulling them apart. The excitement was not about ownership, it was about experience. One of the biggest things that disappeared from Christmas in the 1990s was time. Conversations lasted longer, meals took longer. Silence existed without feeling uncomfortable. There were no phones constantly pulling attention away. Presence was not a goal, it was the default. Christmas was also private. It was not performed for an audience. Moments were not shared online. They were shared with the people in the room. There was no pressure to make things look perfect or impressive. Christmas belonged to the family, not to a feed. Anticipation mattered more than consumption. You dreamed more than you received. You imagined more than you owned. And that imagination made everything feel bigger than it actually was. The Christmas of the 1990s was not perfect. It had its flaws, its frustrations, its limits, but it offered something that feels rare today. Space. Space to wait. Space to feel. Space to be present. Maybe it is not the things we miss. Maybe it is the way time felt when we had them. As the years moved forward, many of the small details that shaped Christmas in the 1990s didn't disappear all at once. They faded quietly, almost unnoticed, replaced by convenience, speed, and constant connectivity. At first, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like progress. But over time, something subtle began to change. Christmas started arriving earlier. Decorations appeared sooner. Music played longer, and somehow the season felt shorter. What once unfolded slowly now seemed compressed, stretched thin across weeks without depth. The anticipation that once built naturally was replaced by saturation. When everything feels like Christmas all the time, nothing truly feels like Christmas anymore. In the 1990s, boredom still existed during the holidays, and that boredom had a purpose. Long afternoons with nothing scheduled forced people to talk, to play simple games, to sit together without distraction. Silence was not uncomfortable, it was normal. It allowed moments to breathe. Today, silence is often filled instantly. A phone, a screen, a notification. And while those things connect us in some ways, they quietly disconnect us in others. Christmas lost some of its stillness and with it, some of its emotional weight. Another thing that slowly disappeared was the sense of limitation. In the 1990s, limits shaped the experience. Limited photos, limited gifts, limited programming, limited access. Those limits created focus. They forced attention onto what was actually happening in the room. When something was limited, it mattered more. Christmas mornings felt longer because there was no rush to move on to the next thing. You stayed with the moment. You played with what you received. You talked about it. You shared it. The experience was stretched, not because there was more to do, but because there was nowhere else to be. Food followed the same rhythm. Meals were prepared slowly, often together. Recipes were not optimized or simplified, they were repeated. The same dishes appeared year after year, creating continuity. Even imperfections became tradition. Those meals were not photographed for validation. They were eaten for connection. Another subtle difference was how expectations were formed. In the 1990s, expectations came from imagination, not comparison. You didn't know how other families celebrated unless you were there. Christmas was personal, not performative. There was no invisible audience watching. That privacy allowed authenticity. It allowed families to be themselves without measuring their experience against anyone else's. As Christmas became more visible and shareable, it also became more comparable, and comparison quietly changes how things feel. What once felt enough began to feel incomplete, not because it was lacking, but because expectations shifted. The magic of Christmas in the 1990s was not created by perfection. It was created by presence, by repetition, by shared time, by moments that were never meant to be remembered, but were remembered anyway. Looking back now, it's easy to focus on the objects that disappeared. The catalogs, the VHS tapes, the handwritten letters. But those things were only symbols. What truly mattered was the environment they existed in. An environment shaped by patience, attention, and shared time. Christmas didn't feel special because it was rare. It felt special because it was felt. And maybe that's the quiet lesson hidden inside all these disappearing Christmas things. That the magic was never really in the objects themselves. It was in the way we lived around them. If there's something worth carrying forward, it's not about recreating the past exactly as it was. It's about reclaiming pieces of that rhythm, slowing down, leaving space, letting moments unfold instead of rushing through them. Because Christmas doesn't need to be louder, it doesn't need to be bigger, it doesn't need to be faster. Sometimes it just needs time again.